it's flipped. And now parents are saying, I don't want to have to ask you for permission to do something different and better for my kid. The system should adapt for me.
Hello, welcome back to the Kindled podcast by Prenda. I'm Kelly Smith. I'm hosting today, and I'll be talking to Matt Frendewey, Vice President of Strategy at Yes Every Kid. He has over 2 decades experience in strategic communication, which includes working as a senior advisor to secretaries of education, governors. He's been in the Department of the Attorney General. He's a Michigan native, spent 8 years at the Michigan AG, and he's held various roles in gubernatorial and presidential campaigns. Matt recently moved from Washington, D.C. to Michigan with Jen and their 2 dogs and remains a loyal Detroit Tigers fan. You're going to love this conversation. We're going to dive into Matt's brain around school choice and the movement that's currently happening, a lot of great polling data that he's getting from parents, and an understanding of just what's happening. We'll also address some of the criticisms and attacks on the school choice movement. So with that, Matt Frendewey, I hope you enjoy the conversation. Okay, Matt Frendewey, welcome to the Kindled podcast by Prenda. I'm so glad we're going to be talking. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I appreciate you having me on.
I've been a Yes Every Kid, I call it broader community member for many years. I see you guys out in the world and advocating for school choice. I think it's amazing what you're doing, and I think it's an important discussion. I love how you've added recently, I don't know if it's that recent, but you've been writing and you just put out these very thoughtful, very well-researched pieces. I get them in my inbox and I always stop whatever I'm doing. I'm going to read whatever Matt's talking about because it's good stuff. So thank you for the work you're doing.
I appreciate that. That's really kind of you.
All right. So
somebody's reading it.
It's not just me. So your recent one was saying, hey, there's this idea from 2009, I think peak Obama, it was like ed reform, and both parties supported it. It was about taking schools in and acknowledging that the world has changed since Horace Mann, all of that, and saying, what do we do differently? How can we reform? How can we change? But what you're kind of saying in this piece now, and I've picked up on this, I think in the movement, that we're not really talking about reform anymore. I think you used the word, I don't know if you did it in Spanish, transformación. It was like you're saying we actually need a transformation, not a reformation. Can you just sort of differentiate for us? What are you saying? What's the difference between ed reform a la Obama, Joe Biden before he became president? These people were pro change in education. They later swung back the other way, but we can talk about the politics later. Yeah, what exactly are you noticing?
Yeah, I appreciate that. The way I kind of see it and what I wrote about was there's always this attempt to talk about education reform. And that's a term I use too, right? Like just in short form of what we do. But I don't really think that that's what we're trying to do or what we're trying to accomplish. And that's what this piece that I was kind of reflecting upon was talked about this. It longed for the day of bipartisan education reform. And I argue that there's 2 problems with that premise. The first is that reform assumes that the system is fundamentally fine. It just needs tweaking, right? You just need to make modifications to it. And the second was that, if we have bipartisan come along, then it'll be popular. And my argument to that is like education policy that we believe in, education freedom, parents be able to choose the environment best for their kid. Those policies have been popular for a decade or more. As long as I've been in this movement, it doesn't take bipartisan votes to make it popular. And if anything, that's just also a nature of public policy. Politicians are oftentimes the downstream of good public policy change, right? They're following the public. They're not leading the public.
Yeah, which makes sense, right? If you're out to get votes, you're kind of trying to read the room and take the temperature and sort of do the things that the people want, which, I don't blame them for that. But yeah, you're saying they're downstream, so we're not going to really get anywhere by pushing for political compromise necessarily, and instead getting to principles. I mean, this is a pretty bold statement you make. I mean, it shouldn't be. I think in any other facet of life, we would say the parent making a decision for their child feels right? But for whatever reason in education, and we're now almost 200 years into the common schools movement, right? So we're very, very used to a world where that's just not true. You don't make the choice as a parent, or you didn't for a very long time. Yeah, can you say more about the doctrine, right? What do you mean by parent education freedom?
Sure. Well, to me, it comes down to kind of like decision rights, right? Historically, the system was in charge. It set the rules, and it still does in a big way. It determines how education works, where it works, when it works, and then parents kind of ask for permission if they wanted to deviate.
Mm,
In the last 10 years, and really accelerated through the pandemic and COVID, it's flipped. And now parents are saying, I don't want to have to ask you for permission to do something different and better for my kid. The system should adapt for me. It should modify for my kids' needs, and families are there. I am going to steal a line from Todd Rose, who's an author and researcher, where he said parents don't want better; they want different. And to me, like, that sums it up. They don't want just a better, mousetrap as we see it. They want something completely different altogether. And we see that in the marketplace. We see that with the growth of Prenda, the growth of microschooling writ large. The fastest growing form of schooling is homeschooling. And it's not like homeschooling that you or I might remember it as when we were younger. It's
right.
homeschooling done radically different and in really cool ways. Charter schools have like continue to grow. Private schools, a lot of them talk about being at like max capacity after decades of lagging, right? Where private schools were constantly trying to close campuses or close schools. And so to me, just speaks to this um, really big shift in the parent's mentality to say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it my way. I'm going
Yeah.
to own my own education. I'm going to own my kids' own education. And the system's going to tell us or do what we want for us. And we're not going to ask wait and ask for permission.
Incredible. I mean, I feel that energy too as I go out and meet with parents all the time and see people. I think one of the things that would surprise folks, it surprised me, is that it's not just the parents. I mean, you're starting from parent gets to make a choice for their child and seeing each child as an individual. The math is very simple. Then that should not be one system for everyone. That should be lots of different learning environments with different approaches, different values, different preferences. I mean, there's of course a wide diversity of preference in the marketplace. That said, I'll talk to leaders of bigger systems that are running the government controlled top down system. And especially during COVID, I remember noticing this. They felt like they had to make the call for everyone, for tens of thousands of children. And it was tough, right? Some people felt strongly that we needed more masks. Some people felt strongly we needed less masks. And I just kind of said, wow, I feel bad for you in that position to have one giant stick that has to place somewhere because you're inevitably going to disappoint people. And that's why I think there's a lot of frustration. One of the things that we see with microschools is each one gets their own lever. And in a way, each student gets their own lever. So you have a lot more ability to customize and tailor things. And then that leads to less stressed out adults. Like the educators themselves are having more fun as well. And we'll run into administrators of school districts that will come to our events looking into starting a microschool because they're so burnt out on trying to, run in a maybe a more rigid way that's really causing a lot of grief for them and everybody else.
Well, yeah, and this isn't a new idea in the sense of like, and I wrote about this a few weeks ago. Like Frederick Hayek wrote about this, right? Like around decision rights, and he wasn't, Frederick Hayek didn't go and lobby for school choice. He wasn't out there, under the dome. He wasn't a, Austrian economist. But his notion was that when you centralize authority and decision making, you move decisions away from those closest and best situated to answer the difficult problems on the
Right.
ground. And so you're right. Like I feel for the superintendent who has to say, "Yeah, I have to make this decision for all these families, for all these students." When really the answer to that is just flipping it and going, "What's best? How do we drive those questions and those answers or those problems down to the closest level that they can be solved?" And that's
Yeah.
really why I think you see families that don't just enjoy switching to smaller learning environments like micro schools, but they stick to them. They
Yeah.
thrive in them because they feel a connection with the parents. We've done numerous one-on-one interviews with families who switched. We call them switchers.
The switchers. Yeah.
And we did about 30 plus interviews 2 years ago. We're in the middle of doing some more right now in different states. And it's a family that switched from public school to anything non public, private, micro school, homeschool, some charter. And almost all of them talk about, one, how much more connected they feel with the new learning environment. And part of that is just me just shifting the mindsets of being a passive consumer to an
Sure.
active consumer.
Yeah.
And the second is the satisfaction. I think less than, I think we roughly estimated around like 95% of the families we talked about were happier with the decision they made. That 5% was mixed mostly with families who were just still nervous, right? They thought they made the right decision for good reason. They were concerned for their kid. They took them out of a public school, moved them somewhere else, but they were, still waiting to see how things were going to shake out. That to me is just a tremendous shift, and we should be leaning into that right now, not trying to find ways to throw out roadblock blocks for on parents.
It's a fascinating thing to put yourself in the shoes of a gatekeeper of a large institution, right? And I've met some of these folks that are very much aligned with this idea. They're starting to think in terms of a portfolio of options, giving a lot more. I mean, great school leaders have done this forever because you talk about who's close to the problem. Well, teachers are, right? But
Mhm.
I mean, we get every day inundated with teachers that are frustrated because their voice isn't heard, their input, which is so good. I mean, they have such good ideas of what's needed to help these kids, and they're not allowed to do it. So for those people, starting a microschool is a way to express their creative outlet, do something different, have the freedom themselves, and of course the parents flock around that as well. But that's been a thing. I think listen to your people, weigh in leads to buy-in. Those are basic leadership principles. But now there's an added layer of you can structurally do things differently. You can create. In fact, we're still working with several school districts and trying to find more where we can do
Yeah.
micro schools inside the district, right? These kids don't have to unenroll. They don't have to go sign up for any scholarship program. They can do micro schools. They can keep all the supports and the great things that schools offer: free breakfast, free lunch, counseling, specials. I mean, transportation. These are important things that many micro schools can't do. And it doesn't make sense to me. Going back to what you're talking about, why is this so politicized? I think it makes a lot of sense to start thinking that way from the district point of view.
Yeah. No, I think in a lot of ways, and I think either by bold superintendents who want to take this on, we're going to see a shift, or just the sheer shifting demographics
Yeah,
with fewer students enrolling and more families opting for different options. You're going to see a shift in this direction where districts recognize that they are a service offering, and that if they shift their model, they're gonna be able to better serve families than this kind of mentality of like, I have to have the whole kid and I have to kind of keep them inside my school for everything, versus kind of like flipping the script on that and going, hey, how do I work with a private school or micro school and say, hey, we've got some good offerings here that we could host, we could collaborate, and that will create a better outcome for the family. And you're starting to see that in Arizona, a little
yeah,
bit in Utah and Florida, where you have public school districts printing off rate cards, partnering with micro schools, saying, "Hey, if you wanna buy one-off class, we'll sell it to you."
absolutely.
We wanna collaborate for what's best for the student.
Sports, music. I mean, there's so many
Yeah.
places where this could make sense. Well,
Yeah.
you mentioned a little bit of the polling you're doing, Matt. Is there anything else that you're hearing from parents? What's the summary headline of what parents want these days, and how is it different than what it's been in the past?
That's a great question. I'd say that there's a couple things. One, education freedom writ large is just wildly popular. One of the shifts we saw coming out of the pandemic, and then one of the questions that came out of it was like, will this stick, right? Will the popularity stick? And not only has it stuck, it's continuing to grow. This unique thing is happening where you see likely you see more and more families, and Ed Choices touched on this in their morning consult poll. More and more families are saying, I want to explore options. I wanna see what else is out there. I'm considering options. That to me is like showing that, that's like families walking up to the water, right? Getting ready to take a dip. The next thing that you're seeing is families saying, I want a system that's more flexible. I want education to be more flexible. We did polling on this, and the funny thing though is you have a huge delta, which is about 40-point delta between families that say I want a system that's more flexible. It's around 74, 75%. And then you have like 28% that say, how flexible is the system? And they're like 28% say it's flexible. Like that's a huge delta between like what I want and what I have. That to me is the room for opportunity right there. Leaning into that flexibility. You touched on this in one of your other podcasts where families aren't looking, they don't think of themselves or their kids as like systems. They don't think of themselves as like, well, I'm a public school system kid and I'm a micro school system kid. They want a system that is flexible to them. They want a model that says, hey, you want to do, uh, to your point a moment ago, you want to do, arts or sciences at this school down here. Great. We're going to make that work for you. And you want to do your core classes here at maybe at the micro school. Great. We're going to make that work for you. And you want to go enroll in the public schools sports program. Wonderful. We're going to make that work for you. That's what parents would love. And inadvertently, antiquated kind of top down, one size fits all model was like, no, you have to be one and you have to opt out,
Right.
be something different. And even
Yes.
private schools historically operated this way. We're like, all right, you're a private school student. If you want to do something different, you have to opt out of us to go
Right.
do something different.
It's a big deal to jump the tracks.
Yeah. It's not how dynamic marketplaces work. It's really not what families want. And so that to me is that
Right.
flexibility, delta that I was referencing where families are wanting to see that space explode.
We have these webinars where we'll get people together, interested parents, interested guides, people that are thinking about microschools and they're new to the concept. So we give them a little bit of intro and then the questions are always fascinating. So we did one of these just yesterday in Florida and there was this question came up. Well, what about like the actual weekly schedule of school? And I said to them, well, every micro school gets to set their own schedule, right? You
Yeah.
you listen to your community, you meet together with the parents. Some of them might need more childcare, some might need less. Some want more time to do extracurriculars or other things. Some want Fridays off. Some want to meet on Saturdays and Sundays. You can do literally whatever you want. And people you could see the wheels just kind of turning on these webinars. They ask a follow-up question. Okay, but what about holidays and the calendar? Like we have to take the school days off. No, you can do it however you want. You go year round, you can go 9 months, you can map it to whatever the local school district is, and that's easier for vacations, or you can do something totally different to build around families that want to go travel for 4 months in November to February. You could do all kinds of things. And by the end of multiple statements like that, it's just interesting to see the enthusiasm and excitement. They're like, oh, it's like never occurred to people before that you could have flexibility on these things because the system, again, was just kind of it was one thing for everyone, which it had to be back then. But now it doesn't have to be that. And so people they're just tripping. And this guy yesterday was so funny. By the end of all these questions, he was like, I'm sold. How do I do it? Like, I'm ready to go. Like, this sounds amazing.
Yeah. Hey, that's it right there. I think that's like the best advice most homeschool families and micro school families give, or that I've heard, which is like, if a parent goes and starts to do their own thing, or a co-op is going to go do their own thing, they're like, take the schooling model that throw it out the window and start from scratch. So like, you're gonna find a way better way to educate your kid
Right.
than what the traditional system has tried to do, which which is what one of the struggles, right? It's like, hey, we're going to get, we're going to make the oldest kids get up the earliest to get into school when they're often the ones that probably need to sleep in the longest. And we're going to get the youngest kids who every parent knows gets up the earliest typically. And we're going to send them to school the latest. Like right there, we're starting off wrong. And every way you think about it,
Right.
the traditional system where you move between classes when you ring a bell, not when you're done with your work, not when you're done with your assignment, not when you've mastered whatever you're working on. It's all kind of like built to satisfy system needs and not students' needs.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love to, tell people, look, I think school has done amazing things. I think the system was the best we could do for so long and information was scarce. I salute so many people in this industry, including family members who are retired teachers and active teachers. And I don't want to, they're probably listening right now. I just want to say all amazing people. I also can see at the same time some limitations. And one of the big limitations, it's no one's fault, is when you can only have one lever, you have to put that lever somewhere. It's impossible for that lever to really hit. And this happens, instructional design. If the teacher's delivering a lesson verbally, in front of the class, there's some percentage of kids that might understand what he or she is saying. And then there's going to be some that are bored and some that are lost. That's just statistics, it's just a distribution around understanding. And that's not a controversial statement, or it shouldn't be. Interesting that, sometimes people fight for that old model still. But yeah, I think we're at a point now where more and more parents, at least, are recognizing, okay, so as this is all happening, there's been a major shift in access. One of my things from the very beginning was, I grew up in middle class America, right? No one I knew paid for school of any kind. That was out of the question. You pay taxes, you go to school, right? That's the way it works. And so when I started Prenda, I really wanted it to be available to families like mine, people that I know in my same neighborhood, and that meant it had to be free. How can we do this? Because I knew about some of the private schools and some of the other entities out there that were charging 10 or 12 or 14 or $20,000 for a kid, and it was out of the question. And I was doing this before ESAs, but there's been, as you mentioned, the last 10 years have been a fascinating time for education. I love reading your newsletters because you go through state by state in meticulous detail of what's going on. Our audience doesn't want all that detail, but can you sort of paint a picture of just what's going on in school choice policy nationwide? What trends do you see? What should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, absolutely. All that is a credit to the great team I have around me here at Yes Every Kid that really is doing the work, and I'm just trying to do my best to summarize it and maybe add a couple funny anecdotes along it. So, a couple things that I would say it's moving. First, trend wise, universal ESAs, education savings account, remains extremely popular. I think in this year alone, we've already done a sampling of polls in a number of states. Universal ESAs is around typically like 71% support, 68% for support. I have to go through the states like Nebraska was 71%, Missouri was 68%, Texas was 67%, Mississippi 66%. So the public support is there. So then the question is, all right, the public's there. Where are the politicians? Where's the policy? Texas just enacted one of the biggest programs last year. It's in process right now. They've had a huge demand on the number of ESA applications. You saw another state, Idaho, they passed an education tax credit, a little bit different than an ESA, but a tax credit. Again, huge demand from applications. North Carolina, same deal. They had a big program, and again, more demand. So you have this public support that's there. You have once the programs are in action, you have demand is there. Arizona, where you're from, same deal. Now that doesn't always prevent politics doesn't get in the way of good ideas, unfortunately, or I should say politics always gets in the way of good ideas. And so we've seen some challenges, right? In Arizona, we see an effort we see two ballot proposals that are kind of aiming to try and regulate the program in different ways. In Tennessee, you've had efforts to undermine an expansion to the program. In Mississippi, the lieutenant governor came out and just flat out said he wasn't going to, and who has tremendous um, political clout, the way their legislature is structured, flat out said it wasn't going to happen on his watch. So you still have some laggards, if we want to call them that, folks
Yeah.
who are gonna move slower than the public. But as I've said before, like it's happening. It's the movement's there.
Yeah.
Whether or not the politicians are gonna, stand in the way, to me, it's just a matter of time. You know, 10 years ago, I would say even more, 12 years ago, Arizona passed the first ESA in the country, and people kind of, said it's too complicated. Families aren't gonna understand it. At the time, it was only for special needs families, then low income and families on reservations or military families. It was really niche, and we continue to talk about how the fact that like the general public wants this. They really want to have a flexible funding mechanism like an ESA. And today, universal ESAs are the norm. It's just expanding rapidly.
Yeah. You get 65 to 70% of parents in support of this policy. There's not that many of one political party. So therefore, it means people from both parties are in that stat, right? That support it. 100,000 kids on the ESA in Arizona. That's something like close to 10% of Arizona students are on the ESA program. That's not all children of one political party. I'm politically neutral, politically independent, have been for a very long time. I still don't understand why this has become a partisan game just in the last 2 weeks. My senator from Arizona, who I voted for and I think is an overall good person, has just decided to pick up this anti-ESA banner, not just in Arizona, but nationally, and try to reject the federal tax credit for school choice. And I'm sitting here just wondering, I don't know if this is political analysis that you can sort of share with our why is it so controversial if the people themselves are in support of it? They want this for their kids and for other people's kids.
Well, yeah, it's politics a little bit, right? Unfortunately, politics, the way it's structured, right? It's not always about what's the most popular; it's what's the most influential.
Mm.
And on the Democratic side of the lever, to your point, again, I have some great friends on the who are Democratic members of the Democratic Party who are either elected or at work there. And a lot of times we just agree to disagree on this issue, or they privately tell me they're there, but they publicly can't. And it's
Mm.
because of the politics of the Democratic Party. The teachers union has huge influence, and they put a marker down that if you are on the wrong side of this issue, they will come after you. And so politicians have to make a decision, right? Do I want to lean into this issue and potentially lose all the other issues that I'm advocating for by being ousted? Or
Yeah.
do I go along to get reelected? And then hypothetically, like Senator Kelly from Arizona, I can go do all these other things. But I think
Yeah.
what's most disappointing with Senator Kelly's recent argument, who you mentioned from Arizona, was that the federal education tax credit does nothing to impact.
No state budget at all. Yeah. Okay, let's just limit it to state conversations, because I
Yeah.
think there's honest people in state houses, and I think I got to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? So I'm
Yeah.
going to walk through some criticisms. I want you to just think of this as we're
Bring it.
going to just try to figure this out for sane people. We're not talking to politicians anymore. This is one thing that they'll say is every time a kid gets an ESA, $7,000-$8,000. In Texas, it's $10,000. This is state dollars that have been collected for taxes, going to a family that's not using public schools. That money is not going into public schools. So the phrase you'll hear is bankrupting, right? This is bankrupting public schools. Senator Kelly's talked about it, but many, many others. It's a common refrain. What would you say to somebody that's concerned about, look, public school has done a lot of good in the world. This is adding value to families that need it. We don't want to kill this institution, and you're killing it by doing these programs. I mean, what would be your answer?
Yeah, I'd answer it probably one of three ways. The first is like get to the purpose. The purpose of education is to get every kid the skills, the knowledge, the talent to learn and be successful in life. Right. That's I think is something we'd all agree on. And I think the next thing we'd all agree on is that every kid is unique and wonderful, and they have God given talent and potential, and to limit them because of what's best for quote a system is wrong. I don't think anyone, when we first started to build this thing 200 years ago, this public school system, would think that we'd get to a place where we say, hey, the funding of a school building is more important than the funding of a child. That's going to require difficult conversations, but it's going to require healthy conversations that we can have while doing what's right for every individual child. And the second question I'd have is when you've seen choice programs in action, the data actually goes to show you that public schools actually net benefit, right? Historically, they net benefit by the mark of billions of dollars, whereas, and the reason being is they'll end up continuing to keep those that really care about the funding. The public school keeps the local funding, and it's just the state funding that goes. So they keep local funding for a kid they never have to educate anymore, which
Mm.
arguably would increase the funding pie for that school. So they will keep anywhere from like 2 to 3 to 4, sometimes more than that, depending on the local funding element, while just the state funding moves and follows with the kid. And the third argument is just simple, like fairness, right? I don't think it's right, and I don't think anyone would agree that any public institution or any private institution should receive public dollars for something it's not doing. So if a child is leaving that school to go somewhere else, whether it's homeschool, private school, public school, we wouldn't want to continue to keep funding a system just even if it no longer has a student in the classroom. And to me, like that's just a simple fairness argument that I think most would recognize is kind of a right or wrong.
Yeah. So for homeschoolers since the 1970s, and they had to fight for this, right? There was a whole legal
Yeah,
saga with battling for the freedom to they didn't even say, give me money. They said, just give me permission to take my kid, even though I don't want the tax dollars back that I've already paid. I'm
yeah,
going to have paid taxes for the school system, and I'm going to buy my own curriculum. I'm going to do my own work. These people were scrimping and saving, putting this together and fighting their way through, legal arguments that were trying to sort of prevent them from doing that. So yeah, for those people to say, hey, I should be allowed to do that. I mean, you start to look at this at a certain point and say, whoa, that doesn't feel very fair. Like we're not treating these people squarely, right?
Yeah.
They're doing all this work and they're educating their kids and they're not asking anything of the system other than permission to do it, right? And now I think what we're saying with ESA is, and here's and I think this is the other point. It's less money. So Arizona's ESA dollars are $7,500. Arizona's average total, you'll know better than me, 15,000, something like
Yeah.
that. So if we're talking about half of the overall tax dollars, I just can't see the math. And I would love for Senator Mark Kelly to explain to me how every time we take a kid out to go do something else, you're spending half as much. Like, how is that breaking budgets? How is that bankrupting anyone? Especially what you say, that there's still money going to the school from the local and maybe federal components. So this additional dollars that are still being collected by the system itself.
The other real hard truth that most folks who oppose ESAs, for example, don't want to admit is oftentimes they want that they need, as they'll put it, they need that funding to fund uh, like systemic debt and like historical outlays and long-term commitments, financial commitments that are being saddled on a kid. And to me, again, it gets down to like a right or wrong. Like the idea that we should keep that kid in a school that the parent says just doesn't work for them to fund, the debt in the building because they took out some
Paying
loans.
back bonds and things like
Yeah,
that
exactly.
at 10
Like
years old.
we've lost our way as a country. If that's what we're going to start prioritizing over
Right.
individual students' education experiences.
Right. Okay, let me give you another one, Matt. This is fun.
Yeah.
These programs, this is another thing you'll hear the opponents say, these programs are reckless, irresponsible, they're full of fraud and waste. So they shouldn't be allowed to exist, or they need to be heavily regulated and interfered with to the point where we can't take quite so many risks with them. Can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah. Well, the first is, let's start with facts, right? The facts are nearly every instance where they've looked into private school choice programs, whether it's in Florida or Arizona, the two largest in the country, the fraud rates are ridiculously low, like extremely, extremely low. Like by extremely low, I mean, we're talking about 1 to less than 1%. What oftentimes gets caught up in those numbers and artificially inflates them is misspending, where a parent makes a mistake, the system might catch it, or they might tell the parent, "Hey, next time don't do that," or or the parent pays it back, or refunds the money, and those are misspending, right? But that, I would argue, is not fraud, where a parent is out fraudulently stealing money. What really frustrates me though when we talk about this is, like, I don't want fraud in education funding, but I grew up just outside Detroit. I worked for the Attorney General of Michigan for 8 years, and I can tell you of cases of millions of dollars of fraud in the public education system. I can tell you that in Arizona's largest school districts, there's been $100 million in fraud, documented fraud where people have gone to jail. That's actual fraud. And then that's separate from the misspending in public schools. And so it's like, to me, it just rings a little hollow when I hear folks bring this up, but they are completely silent
Right.
when when Mesa Public Schools had a major fraud incident, or where hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment went missing, and they were completely quiet, or they said, well, we should just buy more computers or whatever went missing, as opposed to, hey, that one parent in Arizona that made that one bad purchase. Not only are we going to punish that parent because maybe it was wrong, but we're going to punish all the parents.
Everyone.
Yeah. Like, if that were the case, no public school would exist. If we were to shut down every public school, if they were ever caught doing something fraudulent, all public schools would be closed. We don't
Right.
do that. It's not, operational. The other issue, sorry, just to jump in, the last
No,
point
this
I
is great.
had is the fraud rates in other government funding programs are off the charts, right? Like, Arizona is going to face a federal penalty on their I want to say their Medicaid fraud rate. If you don't have your Medicaid fraud rate below a certain percentage, you will get penalized by the federal government. They're going to face a significant penalty to the federal government because of the amount of fraud that's existing in the state's Medicare. But meanwhile, we're going to focus all our
Yeah.
attention on,
All the
like,
energy.
you know,
Yeah.
And that's like 100, like tens of millions of dollars of fraud. We're going
Yeah.
to focus on like,
Presumably higher than 1%,
yeah,
some number like
1%
that.
of
Yeah.
fraud because one
Yeah.
parent made one choice that
Yeah.
either we didn't agree with, or maybe it wasn't a wise decision and was caught and was asked to
Right.
be paid back.
Yeah. Incredible. I mean, this logic is great. And I wish everybody that's considering signing a petition right now for ESA or taking it to the ballots later, if they do get enough signatures and this becomes a question that goes to voters, I just wish they would think about this the way you're thinking about it. I think it's helpful to see. And you make a fair point. I mean, holding this up, if we're concerned about fraud and waste, let's be concerned about that, but let's do it in a consistent way across everything and not use it as a sort of a selective vision of, one particular program that we really don't like.
And when I worked in the government, when we wanted to go after fraud and healthcare fraud and other systems fraud, we started with the biggest amounts and worked down. And in
Right.
Arizona, there are public policy officials who want to start at the smallest spending amounts, like the parent level, and go up. And to me, I'm like, that is the wrong way to go
Feels
when we
weird.
talk
Yeah.
about tax dollars.
All right. So let's jump to another question. And you'll hear this a lot, even from people who are supportive of the ESA idea. It's about accountability. I think there are sincere people here that would say, look, this is education. This is serious. What happens to your kid will affect me and my life. And, because it's a collective good in that way, it's important that the government get involved and the government enforce a standard. So the logic here is that we need more accountability. We need the government ensuring that the schools are doing the right things or holding the right bar. How do you talk about that when you meet with folks? And let's assume, again, good intentions and really take that argument seriously. What's the answer back? Like, how do you talk about that?
That's a great question, and it is something we hear a lot in this space. The first point I would have is just I think we need to reclaim the definition of accountability. Accountability, we've done research with this. We've gone and met with dozens of parents and asked them, what does education accountability mean to you? And most parents end up getting frustrated because they don't feel like the system or the schools are accountable to anyone. And it's because accountability to a parent is a consequence, good or bad. Parents, when you ask them, like, what does accountability look like to you and your kid? And they're like, well, if my kid does something wrong, I hold them accountable. I tell them they did this wrong and maybe there's a negative consequence. Or they did something and they stuck to their word and it was good and my kid gets a positive consequence. Parents are like public policy officials don't always, I think, give them enough credit. They're wise to it. They don't see testing
Right.
as accountability. It's not to say they're anti-testing per se, but they don't see the consequence that comes with it.
Mm,
Accountability is, to me, there's no greater accountability than telling a public school, I love this school so much, I'm sending my kid back here next year.
right.
And there's no greater accountability to a private school than a parent saying, and this was my story, my parents' story. My parents took us out of a private school and sent us to public school because they didn't teach science one year. And they said, well, your kid will get tested on it next year. And my mom said, no, we're sending Matt to private school. That's accountability. That was my parents exerting accountability on that school.
Right.
Now, separate from that is testing, right? Like assessments. Now, that's important too, but I think to me, it's making sure that that assessment is tangible to the parent. And right now, that's to me the where our quote unquote test based accountability is broken. It's not designed, whether anybody wants to admit it or not, it's not designed for the parent. It's
Right.
designed to give like large picture level data. Which is why the data comes out typically way late,
Yeah. Months later.
months later. It's not actionable. And then as a result, it frustrates the parents. Parents get frustrated. The teachers get frustrated. Everybody gets frustrated. And then, we like circle the drain and nothing changes.
But if you get frustrated in July, it doesn't matter because you forget about it by the time. Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. And so it ends up being like parents end up feeling like it's meaningless. But while at the same time, parents are like, wait a minute, you stressed my kid out for weeks on this thing. You
Yeah.
disrupted all of their learning. You did, 2 weeks of remedial training to get ready for the test, all
Hmm.
for the results to come out in July. And for me to find out now in August when my kid starts the next school year that they're behind
They're
or maybe
behind on
they're,
reading. Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. Wow. Well, I think it's really helpful. And I love how you talked about this, the idea of accountability. I'm just thinking through a situation we had as parents. before doing Prenda, we sent our kids to government schools, the district school nearby. And we had moved into a place that we thought had good schools. We did the research like so many people do. And we were fortunate enough to be able to afford a house in a neighborhood with an A-rated school. And we got a teacher that was toward the end of her career and just wasn't, that's hard. I mean, hard to say, just wasn't a happy person. I mean, really, I think just tired and maybe had been through it. And our poor little kindergarten son, it was a rough time because he perceived that this woman just didn't like him at all. And when we drilled in a little bit to find out, it seemed like she didn't like him at all. I mean, it was like, yeah, you're basically right. I mean, it's like annoyed that you're here, treated us rudely, and sort of complained. And it was like, like, what could we do? Like, we could, if we wanted to, we could go talk to the principal about it. And I think we may have done that, taken that step. Ultimately, the principal's like, I've got, 3 classrooms and the other 2 are full. Like, sorry, this is how it works. If we really wanted to, we could have advocated somehow to the district or gone to a school board meeting or made noise. But ultimately, there's nothing we could do, right? We were where if that had been a microschool that was a self-sufficient, entity, I think we would have said, hey, let's go try something else. Let's make the move here. And the level of accountability that you're talking about really is incredible. Unfortunately, we hadn't yet entered that phase of consciousness as parents because legally we could have done it then. We just didn't know it. And I think that's a lot of parents these days. They still think about accountability the way that we're taught to think about it, which is like, don't worry, like, look at this banner out here. This is an A+ school. It's like, wait, but my kid's having a terrible experience and it's affecting not only his learning, it's affecting his day-to-day, like, mental health, and that's not okay, really. But we were sort of conditioned to believe, I think, that it was okay.
Yeah. Well, uh, I'm glad your kid's doing better and has moved on and
It was a
uh,
long time ago. He's yeah,
eventually
he's still,
inspired you to start Prenda. So thank you to that
yeah,
teacher. Uh,
yeah. Thank you. That was great.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the other part that frustrates parents around this conversation around accountability. It's oftentimes framed up in the reform space of like either your ability, which means that you want to let go of switching as a means of accountability and just use testing.
Mm,
And if you're anti testing as a form of accountability, well, then therefore you must be anti-testing, and we'll never know how your kid's doing, and we'll
mm,
just it's going to go with the wind. And it's like, no, parents are a little more clever than that. They'd like to be able to drive down the switching cost to make it easier to switch between models, to hold
sure.
model and education providers more accountable. And along the way, good education providers, micro schools, private schools, public schools, good public school teachers, they're going to make sure the parent knows how well their kid's doing.
Right.
And just like that's the 2 can be true at the same time.
They're both true. I mean, this is it. Prenda does it. We've thrown out traditional report cards because we don't think they're actionable or driving the right mindset. We've created what we call the Empowered Learner Report Card, and the kids can see where they're at in their formative assessments. They can see their benchmark from the beginning and the end of the year, see their growth. Parents love this, and we can talk about it in real time and use it as an educational tool to help fill gaps and help kids progress. Kids feel empowered by that. Parents are happy with it. Yeah, it feels like night and day a difference. And it's not what, I think when people write these news articles, it's some picture of, everybody's just throwing out all
Yeah.
reading and math and everything. It's like, no, parents want their kids to read, turns out, that's part of the problem is you look at the NAEP scores, it's like not enough of the kids are learning to read even. So how can we really be accountable and help parents who choose us? And if we don't do it, they're going to leave, that's a big deal.
When you ask parents based on like sector,
Yeah.
which students are likely to be the most educated, public, private, homeschool, charter, etc. Almost hands down, homeschool comes out number 1.
Huh.
Parents are like, even if they don't want to homeschool their kids, they're like, those kids are getting educated there. That's the one sector that is like in every state
Interesting.
exempt from like any state mandatory testing. The 2 don't equate. Like the amount of testing that you do does not equate the outcomes of the student.
Right. Well, that's a fascinating insight. It's like that kid's going to be talking to me about Socrates or whatever. And over
Yeah.
here, we're trying to get the main idea out of a passage and answer the right multiple choice, whatever.
Yeah.
Matt, this has been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate all of your willingness to dive into this and take some of these criticisms and have these conversations. Where is this all going? Give me a couple minutes on that, and then I'd love to ask you a little personal question here at the end.
Yeah, sure. Where's it going? To me, I'm just a absolute optimist in my heart. I think it's just getting better and better. I think education is shifting into a world where kids are going to continue to fall in love with learning. Right now, sadly, too many kids fall out of love with learning. Everyone's seen it. Everyone's experienced it probably at some point in time in their own personal life. And when I walk into a micro school and some of these really small startups, to see the joy and the happiness that's you know, filling the room alongside the learning is just encouraging. And that's not to say it doesn't happen in public schools. It does. But to start to see it really rapidly growing outside of the traditional system, to me, is just a mark of something positive that's happening in our country that oftentimes is overlooked.
Powerful. Yeah, I agree. This is not going away. Can you kind of look back on your life? We call this the Kindled podcast. We talk about kindling a love of learning and some of the things you were just describing in some of these settings. Is there somebody in your life that you can kind of point to that kindled the love of learning for you?
Yeah. There's probably the number one would be my fifth grade teacher. He was also our civics teacher or social studies teacher. We do our rotation, Mr. Miller. And that was the year I fell in love with just government and social studies, and it's one of those classes that, like, you remember to this day, of just, like, loved it. I think that's when I started just, like, ignoring, like, grabbing my parents' newspaper and opening up to the world section. I'm, like, being that weird old kid, and it's continued to this day, and to me, it, like, started this weird journey of loving to learn. What I also remember distinctly was, like, I was able to keep learning outside that classroom, and I was able to just, like, go and my room was filled with, like, history books as a kid that had nothing to do with my 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, classes because it was like I wanted to just keep going down that pathway.
It's
And it really
incredible.
started with, I can't put my thumb on it, but just the joy and fun that Mr. Miller made learning about social studies and government back in 5th grade.
Well, shout out to Mr. Miller if you're out there. That's
Yeah.
inspiring. That's some great work, and it's a reminder to all of us that you have a chance to really make a difference in the life of somebody near you. All right, Matt, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for the work you're doing, and thanks for joining us here on the podcast.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it, Kelly. Keep it up.
The Kindled podcast is brought to you by Prenda. Prenda makes it easy to start and run an amazing microschool based on all the ideas we talk about here on the Kindled podcast. Don't forget to follow us on social media at PrendaLearn, and if you'd like more information about starting a microschool, just go to prenda.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep kindling.